Welcome to the Channel Chat podcast. Hello, I'm Marc Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast show, and today I have the privilege of Richard Blanford, the CEO and founder of Fordway, in the virtual studio. How are we doing, Richard?
Very well, thank you. I'm all right. How are you, sir? You well?
Yeah, very good. Well, the sun is shining now, Richard. So I'm a bit happy than I was about a couple of weeks ago because it was the weather was so miserable. I was starting these recordings and thinking, God, it's going to be a hard month, but it's actually starting to get better. So,
yeah, spring is here. I even got out on the motorbike yesterday, so
lovely, great. For Richard, for the listeners that sort of don't know you, could you sort of give us an introduction of yourself and Fordway and what you do in the market?
So Richard Blanford, founder, chief executive Fordway. We are a mid-sized managed service provider. Currently just under 80 staff, about 10, 11 million revenues at the moment. Slightly not growing as fast as we like courtesy of the pandemic, but doing okay. Not too bad. We specialise in providing what we call IT as a service, which is primarily end-to-end IT services, looking after infrastructure and user computing, core services, networking, etc., for mid-sized enterprises and particularly governments. We've got a good long track record in providing services for initially our sort of first government customers would tend to be local authorities, but more recently central governments, agencies, and we're very good at sort of providing that full IT service wrap for those smaller bits of government and organisations that need enterprise class IT capabilities but can't actually afford to put them in place themselves or run them themselves. Yeah,
because I did read on CRN that you were sort of an infrastructure player and you've moved towards more sort of cloud services. So tell me about, because that was up 2016, I believe. So tell me about that journey, because most people want to go on that journey, and maybe even COVID tried to accelerate that journey. So tell me about that, why you made that choice.
Well, actually, it started quite a bit earlier than that.
Right.
So, and we're also, I've been doing this. So Fordway was founded in 1991. So we've been sort of almost like the last man standing of the mid-size. I think just about everybody we've ever considered to be a competitor has either been bought or sold or grown or gone bust. So,
right.
But we're quite happy. We're self-funding. We're privately owned, still in control of our own destiny. And that's a deliberate choice. And I think it's something that our customers like, because if they need something sorted out, then ultimately they can come to the leadership team of this company, and if we can't sort it out, then basically it's not sortable out by us.
Yeah.
One of our values as a company is adapt and thrive, which came out of what actually happened to us in the last serious recession, which was the financial crisis, pre-pandemic. But a lot of your listeners might remember back in the late noughties, sort of 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
We had a pretty what at the time looked like a pretty severe financial crisis and the recession that followed it, and that taught us an awful lot of good lessons. And they always say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We said, well, what happened? So if you look at Fordway's history, back in the 90s we started, many of your listeners might remember a product called Novell Netwear.
Yeah.
So early 90s, Mr. Blanford, me, and a colleague of mine at the time, Spencer Holdaway, formed Fordway as a consultancy and professional services company, helping organisations implement Novell Netwear better, because it started getting complicated. Through the 90s, we then rode the wave, I have to say, and luck is a massively underrated commodity in business. And you look at any successful person, and there's always luck on their side. And I think our timing was excellent. At the time we didn't realise it. We thought we were brilliant business people, but during the mid to late 90s we had the dot-com boom, and then the year 2000, and we surfed it. We surfed that wave. We became an internet specialist. We got into networking, etc., etc. And then our first big learning experience, I'm going to call it, came in sort of just after 2000. We clicked over. The world didn't end. All the computer systems in the world didn't stop. And suddenly everybody realised that the internet wasn't a completely new business paradigm. It was just a different and possibly slightly more efficient way of selling stuff.
Yeah.
So all the investment and all the business cases that had been approved in the late 90s to get businesses on the internet and to buy new systems for year 2000, everyone stopped spending money all at once. Very shortly thereafter, we had 9/11, and the world lifted shining its axis, and we said, okay, we've got to get good at something. So we actually went into core data center products like SAN, storage arrays, etc., which is great, and became effectively a business or an infrastructure transformation bunch of techies for hire.
Right.
That about 3 million turnover in 2001. We sort of dipped down from sort of 4.5, 5 just before the millennium. And then we grew that through the noughties from 2003 to 2008. We got to about 10 million turnover, primarily by delivering large-scale infrastructure transformation projects. And that's where we really started to learn about the public sector. We, found out that, I think I read somewhere that the UK government spends 38% of our GDP. And in 2000, I think we had one government customer, and that was a happy accident.
Right.
We then decided, well, let's learn about this. That particular government customer, actually, in 2002, we noticed they bought a whole load of new stuff, and we weren't asked. And we said, hang on a second, this is a bit weird. We thought you liked us. You've just bought all this new networking kit, and we weren't asked. He said, well, no, because we had to put it out a tender. We thought, what's tender then?
Yeah.
And that tender then put us in, we learned about it, and through that period, we started learning how to transact with the public sector, how to win tenders, getting the right qualifications and certifications like ISO, 9000, 27000, etc. And that put us in the right place to start winning public sector business. All worked fine. Got to 2008, really solid business. A couple of people tried to buy us. I wasn't ready to sell. My partner, Spencer Holdaway, wanted some money, so we parted company in 2008. And then and he took his pile of cash and went off and got married and had kids, and I'd restarted my family at the time. And then we went to a recession, which suddenly, for perfectly understandable business reasons, all of our customers stopped spending money all at once.
Yeah.
And we worked out the key flaw in Fordway's business model in a recessionary period, because if you remember back in the noughties, we had a Blair Brown government that was spending money in the public sector, and there's an awful lot of free cash around, and business was booming. So all our customers stopped spending money all at once, and we worked out that most of our revenue was pretty much discretionary. I think at the time in 2009, we reckon we had 15% recurring revenue of any sort, and most of that was third-party maintenance renewals for products we'd sold previously. So and even that, because everybody was looking at costs, so it was getting tendered out and competitively tendered. So we thought we need to learn something new, and we sat down and worked out with a bit of outside help that what we really needed to do was build a recurring revenue business. And how do we do that? So we thankfully had plenty of cash in the bank. We hadn't spent it all. And we just said, right, we are going to build our own recurring revenue business based around cloud computing. And if you remember back in the late noughties, cloud wasn't particularly sophisticated. I mean, AWS was 2006. It was pretty poor. So we said, we'll build our own platform, put it in our own data centers, because we're good at infrastructure, and we created this thing called Fordway optimized infrastructure we'd sold as part of these projects, put it in a data center, started hosting it. And we then, our first service was disaster recovery as a service, because a lot of our customers had on-premise environments, but then, they didn't want to spend and have a second data center themselves and the costs, etc. That then grew into infrastructure as a service. And then in 2012, something called G-Cloud came along, which was a government framework. And being in the right place at the right time with the right badges, we started picking up quite a lot of public sector work, and this has really exposed us to central governments. And since then, sort of 2009-10, it's been with a couple of self-inflicted wounds, which halted our growth in certain ways. It's been pretty steady progress and evolution of services. We introduced, virtualized desktop as a service fairly shortly thereafter. A number of platform as a service offerings to our customers. And then what we did is we said, right, well, let's wrap it all up into a complete managed IT service. So I think by about 2014, 2015, we effectively became an end-to-end, so a complete infrastructure managed service provider. And all our customers need to do is define the business applications and the business processes they want to host. And bluntly, we can look after the rest. Yeah. We then moved very strongly into security, because obviously government needs good security. And we gained a load of accreditations for the nuclear industry and things like that. So that sort of put us in our niche, where we have a comprehensive end-to-end IT as a service offering. And the big change that's happened in the last 2 to 3 years is more and more of our customers, public cloud is now acceptable. Yeah. Everybody had done Microsoft 365 and the easy stuff and G Suite, etc. What we're now starting to do is, first of all, transform our customers to take advantage of public cloud, but also we're managing and hosting and securing services on the public cloud. And this is what I call Fordway Mark IV. So if you look at Fordway Mark I was the small business, Fordway Mark II was the enterprise transformation, Fordway Mark III was us primarily hosting our own services out of our own data centers and managing it. And Fordways is where we're heading into, is actually transferring those capabilities but using them for the public cloud. So, you know, we're historically primarily a Microsoft provider, so our core services at the moment are based around Microsoft 365 and Azure, but we've just picked up our first major AWS environment to manage. Service integration management and security are both becoming, fortunately, an awful lot more important for us. Security as a business grew, you know, nearly doubled in size for us in revenue in the last 12 months, just selling pure managed security services, particularly around public cloud services, you know, looking after it for the customers, providing a 24/7 capability, you know, investigations, remediation, containment, and remediation services is now really driving us. And I say we learnt that because we had to get really good at security when we first started hosting, you know, important stuff for the government, that meant you had to prove you had the right security controls in place. And we've just grown and developed those offerings.
Yeah. So let's talk about the last 12 months then. So obviously there's the journey from Fordway. The last 12 months, was it a shock to you what happened last March? Were you prepared for it? And was it a seamless transition into working from home, or was it like, oh my God, we've got to keep the lights on?
Well, I can't call myself Richard Blanford, so certainly I don't think anybody predicted it. You know, I think most people, I mean, if you looked at everybody's, I mean, we do risk management for companies. We work on, you know, as part of our ISO 27000 and 2718 and 17, we maintain a risk register. And right at the very bottom of it was something that looked like global pandemic, you know, new financial crisis, you know, something, you know, but it was like, you know, the likelihood of that in the end of 2019 was, you know, and like everybody, it hit us. But what I'd like to say is I think, thankfully, it hardly impacted us at all because of what we'd already done. Particularly, I'm thankful it hardly impacted our customers because the services we've always provided them, by their very nature, allow for flexible and remote working. I'd also like to say I think the IT industry or the IT, you know, service, the IT channel generally has also done themselves a lot of good.
Great job they've done, I think.
Because without technology, I mean, we'd be in a far, far worse place now than we would if this had happened in sort of mid-noughties. Then, you know, I think we have a very different working environment and a much deeper recession than we have now, because the ability to run your business online and the working practices and the management practices didn't even exist. So whilst we had to learn an awful lot of lessons really fast, they were things we'd already started working out the answers to. So it was just applying them and refining them rather than defining, you know, we did. No, for example, we had an NHS customer, I think in mid-March, they rang us up and said, we need to get 2,500 staff working from home by the end of March. And this was March. Thankfully, we did it. You know, we had the resources, but effectively because they had a small virtual desktop environment, and all we really needed to do was scale it. You know, it had actually been in pilot for God knows how long for this customer. I think we probably installed it probably 2019, I guess, you know, early 2019, and they've been playing around with it, and maybe 100 or so staff used it on a, you know, irregular basis. Suddenly, that had to become their core production desktop for everybody, you know, apart from the clinical staff allowed in hospital. And even for the clinical staff, they worked out that actually packaging everything to a virtual desktop made more sense than actually trying to do it on a fat client. So, you know, we learned, but we knew what we were doing. It was really scaling templates. You know, everyone talks about Zoom. Well, we were using Zoom, but we sort of used Zoom for that not very important meeting that we, you know, might want to, you know, just have a quick chat with somebody. And suddenly, you know, Zoom and now Teams became the primary immediate method of contacting our customers. So I'd like to say that, you know, collectively, and our other key thing that really helped Fordway, and I say we were almost untouched by it. I mean, our revenues are flat to very slightly up. We were hoping to grow about 15 to 20% in last year. We'll probably maintain roughly where we are. But the key thing, certainly in the early stages of the pandemic, was winning a new customers. You know, like everything, you know, when a shock comes along, everybody stops all at once. Then thankfully we had three stages. We had the first stage in March where existing customers were saying, please help us. And we were thankfully in a good position. We had NHS customers and central government customers that had to scale and add users pretty fast to cope with the initial stage of the pandemic. So that helped that stage. And then about May to, I'd say, probably September, October, with a little bubble, was, you know, everybody was sitting waiting, like, what the hell's going to happen? How's it going to happen? So we had good recurring, I mean, 80% of our revenue is recurring revenue now, contracted recurring revenue. So, you know, that just kept on going. We had a few customers we had to give furlough relief to on contracts. but our government customers have increased the size of their contracts to cope. So, overall, it was pretty flat. Then we started to see the signs of a recovery, going up to Christmas, and then boom, sort of Christmas time hit us again, and I think it's dipped a bit. But what we've now seen is customers are almost like saying, well, it's like the last recession, people can only sit on their hands for so long. So we're now starting our project work. We aren't winning massive amounts of new contracts yet, but I think they're going to come, but we're winning projects. There's people saying, literally, the data center was out of date a year ago. We wanted to do the public cloud migration, then we stopped it because of the pandemic. We can't. We've either got to spend a shitload of, my French, a large amount of money on upgrading our data center, right now. Plus, we can't actually easily get access to that data center because obviously all the regulations and things around it. So what we're going to do is instead, we'll now that public cloud transformation we were talking about this time last year. Now's the time. Let's just get it done, and we'll try and do it as effectively as we can. So it saves us having to spend a lot of money here to keep something going that we actually were going to, don't necessarily want to. So I'd say certainly since probably mid-January, we've sort of seen a little bit of an uptick that I'm hoping is going to be sustained through the summer.
And Richard, is there anything you've sort of started during over the last 12 months that you'll sort of continue doing that you didn't do before? Apart from maybe, everyone working from home. Apart from that, is there anything else you sort of started, you thought, actually, we're going to continue doing this?
Well, I mean, everyone working from home is the obvious one. I think one of the major learnings, I think, from the pandemic is actually that we're getting to know a lot more about our staff as people. And I think probably a lot of people will say this, but once even through a video camera, once you have a look inside somebody's home, you suddenly you learn stuff about it. And also, we've had to, and we've got something in Fordway called the Staff Liaison Team, which basically is a group of employees who take it on themselves to come to the leadership team and say, we want to make things better. But they've been really active in promoting social events. I mean, we now have, monthly social activities like a quiz night or a virtual escape room, things like this. But oddly enough, I think a lot of our staff are getting to know each other an awful lot better as people, and possibly understand that the bosses are humans as well, and we have the same pressures. There's been a mini baby boom inside Fordway. I know for at least 6 of our staff have managed to.
Well,
people have got dogs because mine is a spaniel. My spaniel now comes and joins us on most conferences, because she hates being the wrong side of a shut door. This sort of, but it actually makes people a lot more human, and I think that sort of shared suffering, and I think probably a higher level of trust in staff than we used to have. Certainly managers of, we can't have staff in the office. I mean, yes, we would expect they're working, but we're working much more on task-based output than time-based output at present. So very much apart from their, our service desk and our 24/7 teams absolutely have to be there, and we know they're there. But for most other staff, it's almost like that. Choose when you work, but that's the output we want to see out of you. That's what we're doing. And the sales team obviously are having to understand new ways of selling, because our stuff is fairly high trust, big ticket items. If you're handing your IT to someone to run for the next 5 years, you've got to believe in that organisation and trust that organisation pretty implicitly. But we working out ways how to build that trust with customers without that face-to-face interaction or that in-person.
Yeah, have you had to adjust your management style? Richard, have you had to adjust your sort of management style, or has your leadership team had to adjust this management style because you're doing video calls and video meetings and video sales meetings? Has it been challenging in that area?
Yes, I mean I'm in a happy place actually, because this was something that was planned before the pandemic started, but I was always moving, out of. So I'd actually said to the leadership team last year that I wanted to be no direct reports apart from my chief operating officer by the 1st of September last year. And the pandemic hit, and we said, do we want to, do we want to continue? I said, yeah, of course we want to continue this. This is just something we're going to have to deal with, and it's a bloody good test. So we've tested our disaster recovery, we've tested our business continuity. All our customers have had to test elements of their business continuity. That's great. We've got a good, solid business. We keep going in the same direction. But yes, I think for certain managers, particularly, I mean, so I'm sitting in our office at the moment, but I'm actually sitting in our office because it's a nice, comfortable, quiet experience. So I have a child at home doing a university course and a wife who's trying to work from home.
Yeah.
It's like, well, go on. I've got this lovely, great office with 70 desks in it, high-speed internet access, and I'm allowed to come in because we're key workers because we look after government systems. So there's no limit on that. And I've actually got pretty much as me and one other guy on a 2,500 square foot floor, and but some teams have chosen, what we said to people is some teams have chosen that they actually like coming into our service desk, for example, and they're the people who have it tougher because a lot of them are younger staff who are living in bedsits, or small, don't have, I'm lucky I've got a study which me and my wife fight over who sits in that to work from. But then, I'm old, I've got a big, decent sized house, and, but a lot of our staff actually want to come into the office because it's a far better working environment than sit perched on the end of their bed or their kitchen table inside a small flat. This sort of stuff. So I think what we're going to see is a much more flexible. And when we poll our staff, most of them, we always used to have the ability to work from home, but it was effectively sort of 1 day a week with your managers okay. Now, most people are saying we like sort of, 1 or 2 days a week in the office. We certainly want to do team stuff together face to face if we can, where it's allowed. But most of the work that we do is intelligence work, so most of it can be done from home. And I think that's probably one thing, I'd say, understanding people's, social desires, what they do outside of work. This is another key learning from the pandemic. The tools, I have to say, were already there. I mean, we're already using Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 and everything else, as with everybody else. So it's just how we use them. And I think what we've had to do is put sort of proper meeting disciplines and policies in place. Like unless your broadband is nut to it, put your video on when you're talking to somebody because it just humanizes it. We put in, because security is important to us, we recognise by moving our, staff to the homes we had, things like compliance, we actually give a working from home allowance now. So every member of staff gets a fixed sum of money to set themselves up properly to work from home, and then they get an annual allowance. And a lot of people use that to upgrade broadband. We sent out a dedicated firewall for everybody to stick on the end of the home broadband, which has got a Fordway plug or a Fordway wireless connection on it and a home wireless, because they get much better home security courtesy of us, but they also get a secure Fordway connection to their whatever broadband they have, and they can use that allowance to pay. So those are the sorts of things, our security team, configuration management, what we do on laptops, both for ourselves and our customers, has become an awful lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Important to us. So we're now providing a monitored and managed secure desktop service to our customers, which is basically what we did for ourselves to make sure we were secure, and then we added it to our customers. A lot of our customers said, that's brilliant. Yes, please. Can we add
did you have any sort of mental health issues with your team? Because I was hearing in the channel, Richard, recently that and it's obvious really because of what's happened, but there's more mental health challenges in the last year than there's ever been in any of the channel. I actually spoke to one client who actually had 50% of his sales team. He had a sales team of 50% of them signed off sick for different challenges related to sort of COVID. Have you had any sort of challenges you had to cope with, or is there any tips you can give to the listeners?
We've obviously had a few individuals and personal situations. I mean, unfortunately, we have had a number of staff who had lost relatives, particularly elderly relatives, and so I think. Yes, our HR team, but we're trying to keep very much on top of it. I mean, so we did sort of three things that I think really helped. So early on in the pandemic, we basically created a buddy system. So we know certain people. So in the sales team, we put our sales team together, for example, with a buddy, so they can just literally talk to each other. The manager obviously looks after them. And we maintain that contact. We have daily stand-ups for most teams. So most teams have a short 15-minute stand-up every morning. People are trying to look out for each other. So yes, I think some people have struggled more than others. Some people have had pretty poor personal situations. I think two key things I would say. First of all is that we haven't furloughed anybody. We haven't laid anybody off. There have been absolutely no redundancies, primarily because we had the robust, stable business. And whilst, there's probably a cost to the business. My view is I want to keep these people through because we need these people when times come up again. So, if it costs us a little bit of money to maintain it, then that's great, but we're going to see our reward coming forward. And likewise with our customers, you know, we've been flexible with our customers because they're struggling in a lot of cases. So, you know, we offered furlough relief. If they were furloughing staff, they didn't have to pay for those customers, those users under contracts and this sort of stuff. And that's reflected, you know, a lot of customers extended contracts on the basis of these sort of things. So, you know, you know, how you behave both to your staff and to your customers, I think is going to reflect long term. And I mean, that's very much in line with our values. You know, we really work on the basis we want to provide great results for our customers. We want to provide great results for ourselves. And those results aren't just purely pounds, shillings and pence at the end of the year and X amount of growth. You know, I don't have a venture capitalist or private equity who's commanding this or says, you know, in 3 years' time, you've got to sell out for this much money. And I've never wanted that. And bluntly, those sort of pressures, I really would hate to have really heavy borrowings at the moment because they're costing you nothing, but as soon as the interest rate goes up, you're going to be stuffed. You know, and you've got private equity. I mean, there's so many people trying to buy us at the moment.
What do you think is the best thing you've learned about the business since sort of COVID started over the last 12 months? What's been the best thing that's made you most proud about the business?
Reaction to staff, undoubtedly. I mean, you know, it's a cliche, and I've got to say, and I don't think there's many leaders, managing directors would say much different to that. You know, I wouldn't say it was without missing a beat, but effectively it's like, you know, okay, here's the situation, and it's funny, and this is just a simple thing of mine, but you know, when it's a little minor thing, things snowball and people get really, really excited about stuff. You know, I mean, I remember we needed to buy some new office chairs a couple of years ago because we didn't have, and the amount of time, you know, so we have a global pandemic, a world's tilting on its axis, everything's suddenly changing, and 99% of people in this company just went, righto, that's fine then, this is good. You know, we just made sure we communicated. I mean, that was really the key thing, is the worse the situation, the more you need to talk, you know, to your staff, to your customers, and made sure that we were looking after, and everybody in the company knew that, you know, we had their back, that we were going to support them through this. You know, we did make a commitment early on that if we could possibly do without furloughing any staff, we would do so, and we've honoured that, you know, for the last 12 months, even though this has gone on rather longer than we anticipated. But I'd say our business, we've got a very solid business. You know, we're not making massive profits, but we're certainly not losing money either. You know, and that's a good place to be, and I think that's putting us in a good place to move forward from. But I'm sort of sorry, I've slightly forgotten the gist of the question you asked me, but I think so. But it's about, you know, what the most important thing. But everybody literally just got on with it. You know, the management team sort of said, okay, we know this has changed. How do we do it? Luckily, we were already doing Agile and Scrum and stuff like that, so the you know, a daily team stand up wasn't different for most people. Most of our teams were already doing exactly the same thing. We just did them remotely rather than sitting in an office. You know, and already previously people have been able to dial into the stand-ups because, like, our consultants and project managers categorically weren't sitting in the office all the time, or the sales team. And then it's sort of adapting and evolving and keeping on side and understanding, you know, what I'm trying to do at the moment is work out, you know, what's coming up, what do we need to do. So we were already moving our business onto the public cloud. We actually thought we'd get a bit of a breather and we could accelerate that process with sort of product design, product development. We've probably done a bit more of it because we had a bit more free time because of less traveling. But, you know, I think we're probably about 3 to 6 months ahead of where we would be if we hadn't had a pandemic, because certain key people have been able to sit and think about stuff a bit more than they potentially could have done.
Let's look to the future, Richard. So it's obviously March 2021 now. What's the things that you're going to take forward now, and you're going to sort of adapt into sort of 2021 to make sure you're going to take advantage of that recovery?
Well, the first thing is, you know, new product and service development. So both looking at, first of all, going to our existing customers and saying, here's some new capabilities we have, you know, let's help you on the journey of those, and also use those to win and attract new customers. I think IT, the channel as a whole, actually hasn't done too badly through the pandemic. So in the last recession, we got a big bubble of companies that went bust or bought and sold, but I don't see many companies struggling that badly, and certainly not sort of direct competitors, managed service providers. So I don't think there's going to be an awful lot of business, that's going to fall in our lap because somebody else isn't there anymore. But obviously, we've got to evolve our offerings, and we're looking into areas. I said security is a key area. We're looking at AI operations, so automated management control of networks. There's some new technologies floating around out there around software-defined networking, etc. Which again, these are the sorts of things that we can add into our portfolio to give us new capabilities. So I'd like to say that the government is spending money pretty much as it always has done in the public sector. A lot of commercial customers have been sitting on their hands, and I'd like this when they come back in, we'd like to be able to take advantage of that. And I think a lot of them will also, I don't think every supplier in the world has behaved impeccably. And I think quite a few people have sort of looked at their current suppliers.
Yeah, I think that's happening a lot, actually. I'm hearing a lot of that in the market. They might not have been wanting to change during the pandemic, but as we're coming out, I think a lot of people are coming into the end of contracts and thinking, you know what, we'll have a look what's on the market. And my last question, Richard, really, if we go on to that point, is what do you think your prediction is? And I know you haven't got, I know you're not Mystic Meg or anything, Richard, but what's your prediction for the demand in the next sort of 6 months? Do you see it going up? New business is going to be an opportunity?
I see it, but not spectacularly, if you know what I mean. I think it's going to be a slow burn. And I mean, if you look at, you try and learn from history, don't you, sometimes, because things tend to go in cycles. So if you look at what happened in the previous recession and pandemic, so back in 2008, 9, 10, I think there were some companies that struggled through, but then when the business started coming up, they obviously overtrading, is quite a dangerous thing in our business. So I think what we'll see is the weak companies or the underfunded companies or the companies will, they're going to struggle, and that might give opportunities. I'm sort of seeing slow growth through 2021, and I think, end of 21, early 22 is, if I was going to say there was going to be a mini boom, I'd like to think 2022 is it, because we've got, outside of the pandemic, we've got a few other, headwinds. Brexit's one. People are really working out what we have bought as part of the Brexit deal, so we've got to understand what that means to a lot of organisations. We've got changing business models. If you're a retailer now and you're not on, where do you go? If you're in hospitality, I mean, that's going to be a bloodbath. We were lucky we didn't have many clients in those fields. We had, 2 fairly major property companies. Oddly enough, one did quite well out of the pandemic because they rented out facilities to the government, and the other one halved in size, over the course of the pandemic. And how they're going to get that back, I don't know. Whether they're going to come back. So I think it's going to be sector by sector specific. But overall, a steady uptick through the middle of 2021. Towards the end of the year, I'd like to think we're starting. Once we're all vaccinated, hopefully we're all in a place we can all mingle. We can work out where things go, and that'll bring the confidence for people to say, right, because we've seen through this. Now we're coming out the other side. And then the one following that is, I'd like to say late 21, early 22. I'd like to think we're going to see a pretty spectacular, I wouldn't say spectacular, but a good solid growth. Obviously, provided A, we don't get pandemic 2 or something happens, or B, the government doesn't balls it up by cocking things up or deciding we've got to repay all debt immediately and overtaxing everybody. I mean, that won't have that much of an impact. But these are the sorts of things. We are. One thing that a country as a whole, and I mean, the good thing, I'm not a politically, I've got to say, but the government. It's good to know the government was there when we needed it, but obviously they're going to, they can have a major impact on how well we come out of this. And I think what the pandemic has taught us is we actually are an awful lot more dependent on the government, even as business people, than we probably thought a few years ago. Both for the policies they put in place, and also how they handle businesses and how they make investments and what they choose to invest in. So I think that's probably some learning for me particularly. And we deal with the public sector, but what they decide.
Brilliant, Richard. That's a wrap. Thanks so much for your time.